In this video, I'm going to be talking about the T-150. So first things first, before getting into the stats and everything of the tank, I'm going to talk about why it is overpowered and what the tank is. So this is the T-150, Tier 6 Soviet heavy tank, the dark horse of Tier 6 heavies, are actually the third highest alpha one after the KV-2 and KV-1S, and people don't really know about it because it was removed from the tech tree in update 5.5. This tank actually leads to the led to the KV-3, and the KV-2 was the one that led to nothing. And you'll see that if you go to the KV-3 and you mount the stock turret and gun, then you look at it, wow, looks a lot like a T-150. But yeah, it used to be a tech tree tank, and that's why it's extremely rare. The removed tech tree tanks are the rarest tanks in the game, even rarer than the AE Phase 1, because no one ever plays them, even if a bunch of people own them. And that is this tank. This is probably one of the hardest removed tech tree tanks to get, because it's at tier 6, it's above the tier which sandbox crates encompass, and it also has just never come back in events. It's never been in quests like the T-21 was. It's never been available for season coins, which the KV-13 and the Sherman Jumbo both were. It's never been in luxury lounge like the Churchill gun carrier has been. So the T-150 is among the rarest, if not the rarest, tank in the game. And it's completely overpowered, which is surprising why there's not more of them in the matchmaker, because I'm sure a lot of people do actually own them. But it could be because veterans don't just play tier 6. So yeah, why is this tank overpowered? You might be thinking that. You might have gone on Blitz kit and looked at the tank and seen its armor and its gun and its mobility and been like, this isn't an overpowered tank. The T-150 breaks the stereotype of overpowered tanks. Generally, tanks that are overpowered are too strong, quite a bit too strong for the matchmaker, and thus they dominate battles. For example, in tier 6 we've got the Magnus, the VK-36 and the Cryos. So the Magnus, American heavy tank, great gun depression, good DPM, high penetration, good reload time with 220 to 5 alpha damage, and amazing frontal armor and good mobility. VK-36, a very similar tank, a bit toned down on the mobility, but more on the armor. And then the Cryos, which just has everything except hit points, really. T-150 breaks out of that typical overpowered tank, what they stereotypically have, which is, great mobility, great armor, great gun with great DPM and accuracy. This has none of those, but it is overpowered nonetheless. I'm going to show why that is right now. So this is the T-150's armor against a standard heavy tank in tier 6, 155 penetration, the Kuromori Mine Mini SP, and you can see typical heavy tank armor for a KV. It's got those upper plate and lower plate which are very weak, and then this mid-angled plate. And then you can see when it turns the hull, you can penetrate the side somewhat unreliably, but switch to premium ammo and it goes in. So it doesn't seem like anything too impressive on the armor at first glance, and it seems like you can go right through the mantlet. Now you go down to the mobility. Wow, terrain resistance is bad. Mobility, nothing too impressive. And then top speed as well, also nothing too impressive. Gun, low DPM, low long reload, great penetration though, and great alpha damage, and terrible dispersion on movement dispersion and aim time. So you're thinking, what makes this tank overpowered? It doesn't seem like it. Well, it's the fact that you angle the armor like this. Yes, this is 155 penetration, which is quite a good level of penetration you do face. So let's take it in the best possible scenario. This is a tier 5 heavy tank, 110. You can see the tank is almost completely side on. It is impenetrable. Here's a tier 6 medium. It is again almost impenetrable, because you can just do this and then they'll bounce off the upper plate, or you do this and they'll bounce off the sides. So there's that. And then for tier 6, heavy tank penetration, you can see while it is penetrable, it's still extremely troll with what you can do with the side armor and angling the front. And that is what makes the T-150 overpowered. The fact that you can angle the hull to extreme sort of angles, which other tanks cannot do, and no one is expecting that, so they just get trolled, completely trolled by the side armor and the frontal armor of this tank, and you will see that in the gameplay. The other part of this tank that makes it good, its mobility is actually very good for how much armor this tank has and really how big the gun is, which is another thing which is great. Its gun is massive. It does a huge 320 alpha damage, which is the third highest alpha for a heavy tank in tier 6. It means you can even trade damage with tier 7s, which is partly what makes it still very good in tier 7, despite its armor not being nearly as effective against tier 7 tanks. Yeah, that is the T-150, that's why it's OP. Of course, I'll try and go through the stats and explain that as well. So let's get into it. There is, of course, a review on my website if you want to check it out without the commentary. So here is the T-150 against that 155 penetration. Fairly average tier 6 heavy tank penetration. And you can see upper plate and lower plate both weak. It's got that angled bit in the middle, but all you have to do is just not hit there. Of course, the turret as well, you can see the cheeks very strong. The areas next to the mantlet are penetrable, and then the cupola is penetrable. And the mantlet itself, while it looks red, it is actually penetrable. However, don't shoot there. I would not recommend shooting the gun mantlet just because it's a gun mantlet. There are multiple reasons you wouldn't shoot a gun mantlet, one being its thick spaced armor. On this tank it's only 90mm, which isn't that thick. However, there's other factors, like the gun mantlet is surrounded by very thick 190 up to 200mm of armor, which if you don't thread this needle perfectly, you're going to miss and you're going to hit here or hit the gun, which makes it quite hard to do because in battle, generally, you aren't right in the face of a tank. The tank is also moving, and of course the turret moves separately to the hull, so threading that needle is pretty difficult, which is why I would not recommend shooting the gun mantlet as a weak point to exploit. There are, of course, situations where that is the best option, and you should. But yeah, that's the mantlet. Next, you can see the side armor, when it is angled, is very strong. Shooting the tracks or any part of the side in this situation will do absolutely nothing, and the tank won't take damage. When the turret is turned, you can see it becomes slightly weaker on the sides. And of course, the upper and lower plate, they don't change much, though the lower plate you can see there's this sort of stronger bit on the lower bit. And of course on the upper bit it does become very slightly red, which you'll be able to see with a lower penetration in a minute. Now switching to premium ammo, you can see the gun mantlet here becomes more noticeable that it is a weak point. And that's because now with premium ammo you can actually go right through the gun, just about. However, other than this, the side armor becomes weaker, the turret when turned is penetrable, and of course that lower part of the lower plate does become weak as well. But that's a normal level of penetration you face. What the T-150 does, which is absolutely evil, is it preys on a good matchup, which makes it from OP in facing tier 6s to just broken against facing tier 5s. And the reason is this. So 110 penetration in tier 5 is pretty standard, pretty average. Some tanks have more, but it's not many. So you can see, the upper plate and the lower plate are both weak. However, against such a low level of penetration, you have to avoid shooting the driver's hatch and the machine gun port. And then of course you can see the lower plate has this bit on the top and the bottom which make it a narrower target. Other than this, the cupola is weak, and while it looks like the mantlet is penetrable, because this is lower penetration and it is a lower caliber gun, in this case it's a 75, don't shoot the gun mantlet, it's just not reliable, like I said previously. And then, so the upper plate and lower plate are penetrable. You turn the hull, now they're not. You can use premium ammo, but again, you can see how the side is still very strong, and the view with premium ammo is still less reliable to penetrate than the view with standard ammo against this tier 6 heavy. And you can also see the angle on this one is more, so it is over angled even further, and this is really why the tank is so strong. There's no weak points when you turn the hull against a tier 5, and they can do absolutely nothing against you, unless of course using premium ammo, but your hull is still very troll. And then here you can see by far the most extreme angling. I'm almost side on, which is the angle you see here in this view, and you can see it here. That even at this angle the side isn't penetrable just because it's such a strong side armor. And that side armor, it doesn't show here, it should be updated already, but it is 90mm thick, which I believe is the thickest side armor in tier 6. But yeah, now looking at when it uses gun depression, this is wrong, I will change this later. It should say 155 AP for this top image, and then 200 APCR for this bottom image. You can see when using gun depression the turret is strong. There's only the area next to the mantlet which shows up as grey. In this situation, shooting the mantlet is ideal because the cupola is quite hard to hit, and trying to hit these side bits will just cause you to either miss and bounce off the turret cheeks, or hit the area which is right here, which is roughly 200. So shooting the center of the mantlet in this situation is actually a pretty reliable way to go through the tank. So having gone through the armor, let's very quickly talk about the different levels of penetration you face. So this is a tier 5 heavy / medium. You can see just like just now, just angle the tank 45 degrees and you'll bounce everything. If enemies use APCR, you'll know because they'll start penetrating you, then just angle a bit more like this. Facing tier 6s, tier 6 mediums in particular, you'll have to angle a bit more like this, which is of course a lesser angle than against tier 5s, however it is still over angling quite a bit, and you can still sort of alternate on this angle and troll enemies. If they aim for your upper plate, then you move, and then they'll bounce. If they aim for your tracks or the side here, then you move and they'll bounce. So that's how the T-150's armor really works well. Next, tier 6. It's basically the same as against the mediums. This is heavy tank level of penetration. It's a bit less reliable, but it can still troll enemies, especially with those track wheels, since a lot of the time enemies will shoot there because on most tanks track wheels are weak. Also, this looks like a KV, which both other tech tree KVs in tier 6 have abysmal armor. And then against tier 7s you can't do much. Basically just side scrape like a normal heavy and hope enemies don't shoot your front. Or go hull down and use gun depression and hope they don't know about the gun mantlet or shooting the cupola. But yeah, that is the armor of the T-150. Basically, just angle it. It's very similar to a KV-4 or a KV-5 in that sense. So this gun, the tank mounts a 107mm gun known as the ZIS-6, made infamous by, well, this tank and the KV-2. Damage is 320, which is very good for tier 6. You can two-shot tier 5 mediums, especially if they used stock turrets. Its APCR and HE damage are completely normal. Its reload is 11.8, which is slow, with a low 1600 DPM. Note that DPM isn't quite as bad as a KV-1S, which is 1500, or a Thunder, which is 1300. So while it's low DPM, it's not terrible. Also, you do have a bit of a reload advantage on those higher alpha tanks. Penetration is amazing. 167 allows you to go through essentially everything, even tier 7s. And if that's not enough, APCR is 219, which is one of the best in tier 6. Both AP and APCR penetration are among the best in the tier. HE is also good at 54. Aim time is bad, it's really bad. However, it's not unusable. 5.1 seconds, which definitely use vertical stabilizer on this one, is perfectly usable, especially when you're hitting for 320 alpha damage. There's really nothing wrong with that in tier 6. 2.9 seconds aim time is bad, but it's not terrible, again, just like the estimated aim time. And if you've played the KV2 with this same 107mm gun, this aim time isn't as bad because the T-150 got an aim time buff, whereas the KV2 with the same gun did not. Dispersion of .407 is actually okay. If you know about tanks in tier 6 and 7 with 105 or 107mm guns, you'll know their dispersion is terrible. For example, the Titan HND, I believe, has the same or very similar dispersion to this, and that is one tier higher, doing less damage. So actually, .407 dispersion isn't as bad as it could be. It's usable. It's not good, but it's usable. Gun handling is terrible. However, it doesn't feel quite as bad as it looks on paper because this gun handling is worse than a smasher. But again, actually a smasher was a terrible comparison because that actually has decent aim time and dispersion as well. But the gun handling really doesn't feel quite as bad as it looks here. And I'm not honestly too sure why that is the case, because .25 and .2, especially on the turret traverse, is terrible. But it doesn't feel all that terrible in game. You just have to stop and you do have to aim, but that is to be expected with such high alpha. Gun depression is 7 degrees. That's good. Not quite as good as a KV-1S because that is also a low-profile heavy tank, and that has 8 degrees. However, it's a lot better than the 7 degrees of the KV-2 mounting the same gun, which I'll just show because I keep talking about it. It's this gun on the KV-2. That is the same gun that the T-150 mounts. But yeah, overall, this gun is fine. It's a decent gun. It's very good at alpha damage trading and just penetrating through enemy tanks. You do have to not rush shots and you do have to take the time to aim, but other than that, it's perfectly fine. Speed is 35, average for a heavy, 11 in reverse, average for a KV but bad for a heavy overall. Traverse speed is 32.6 and 26.1, both are good/decent in tier 6. Acceleration rate is actually surprisingly good at almost 15, and this tank weighs 54 tons, which is an immense weight for this tier. And the actual acceleration rate is a bit worse just due to these terrain resistances. On hard terrain it is 12.4, which is still very good for this armor, and 9.9 on medium. It's decently good. There are faster tier 6 heavies, however, for this tank having that great side armor, 9.9 isn't as bad as it could be. If you know the KV3 or the KV220-2, those are worse than the T-150 in mobility. They sort of have a similar trait of that great side armor. Also a KV4 is a good example to bring in. But yeah, overall, T-150 mobility definitely isn't bad, and if you've played this tank, you'll know that. But yeah, moving to equipment, gun rammer definitely is needed because its penetration is already amazing. And despite it only giving 81 DPM, that 0.6 of a second reload is huge. Your DPM is already very low for a tier 6, and you really need to have a faster reload to be able to deal with situations where there are enemies who are pushing you and your reload is under pressure, basically. So gun rammer is definitely the better choice because you don't need more penetration. Next, engine accelerator. Again, out of the mobility stats, you definitely don't need more traverse, and of course reaching your top speed and going up hills is always nicer when you can improve that with engine accelerator. Next, enhanced armor. Don't play this tank at all if you decide to use improved assembly. You don't need that extra 48 hit points. This tank is all about the armor, and bouncing a single extra shot even from the lowest alpha damage tank you face, a Churchill 1 with a stock gun, will still be worth more than improved assembly. So definitely do use enhanced armor. This tank is just all about that armor and the angling, and it does make a big difference. Gun lane drive, because this tank has bad aim time. Also, it has pretty good shell velocity, 830 on AP and HE, and 1038 on APCR, which are all good. Vertical stabilizer, again, out of the accuracy stats on this tank. Accuracy isn't actually all that terrible. 0.407, while yes, it's very bad for this tier, it's not all that abysmal. Though it definitely needs some help with aim time because it aims very slowly, and adding 0.3 of effective aim time is actually very noticeable in this tank. However, if this doesn't work for you, then go with refined gun. This tank doesn't have any special provisions or consumables, and I would say go with the double repair build because this tank gets tracked a lot because of how it uses its armor. So, with that out of the way, so I've got 3 replays to show. I do have a tier 7 battle, however, it doesn't really show me fighting the tier 7s all that much, so I've decided not to show it. Basically, this tank fights a bit differently facing tier 7s, which is why it's kind of important for me to address it, because its armor doesn't work quite as effectively. However, this is about the T-150's armor, so I'm going to show the tier 6 and 5 battles, just because they show the tank's capabilities better. Obviously, the tank is going to do better in a top tier matchup, rather than a bottom tier one. However, on that note, the T-150 still performs very well in a bottom tier match because it has the alpha to trade, it has the armor to side scrape, and it still has good mobility generally and a good level of hit points to survive. It just plays with less relying on the armor, so I wanted to address that before these absolute steamrolls of battles. So in this game, I know I am OP because there's no enemy heavy tank to contest me. What is the KV-1 going to do against this? So here I'm going to push up, having capped base C, and then there's a Nashorn, which I will never bounce because he has 200mm of standard penetration. But here I'm going to push up, seeing that both of those tanks have shot, and put a shot into the KV-1, and there you'll see the alpha damage of this tank. I'm able to 3-shot any tier 5 almost. Actually yes, any tier 5, and some tier 5s you can 2-shot. But here you'll see, using that nice HE against the Nashorn. Now I'm just going to fully send the KV-1 because I'm quite confident in the armor. Unfortunately, I get a bit overconfident here. He does bounce off the great side armor and track me, but then here I get a bit lazy. I just stop moving and I let him aim, which is something I always put in my reviews. Never stop moving the hull, always angle, always turn, because it gives enemies a harder time to aim. Your angles and armor thicknesses are always changing, and thus they can't be 100% confident. There I stopped moving, and I let him easily aim in a shot on me. With that shot you can see the bad dispersion of this tank, shooting right into the tracks rather than the big fat hull side of the Dicker Max, also known as Fat Max ironically. But here you can see I'm telling my team to hold C because the enemies do have more tanks than us and they are all fast tanks, so they could just cap and win if they get into B, which in this moment is a hard thing to do. So here you can see I do just manage to hit that Explorer with this 0.407 dispersion, and then the Chaffee, I think. Yeah, the Chaffee bounces off me. And the Chaffee actually doesn't have bad penetration. I think it's 125mm, which isn't bad. But this game, not so much about the tank's armor, rather than the tank being a bit more of a versatile vehicle. You can see I've been having to run around a bit on this flank, and less so blocking shots and more so using the gun. So here I've dealt 2000 damage. Unfortunately the Hellcat goes down, and I tell this Nashorn to stay and hold C, because if he leaves and gets to B, he could be caught out in the open, and with him having no armor at all, he could die, and then the Chaffee flanking around and killing him and getting base C. Also, sorry, that was a Panzer IV-G, not a Chaffee that shot me, and the Panzer IV-G has that low 110mm of penetration, which for tier 5 isn't bad, but as I showed in the armor viewer, is absolutely useless against a T-150 when it's angled. But here I'm just going to cap base B, and then go into base A, and I'll just fast forward because the Chaffee does not appear, and we win by caps. But yeah, so in that battle, just using the gun really. You could see a bit of the armor use, but not so much. You'll see that a lot more in the next two battles, which I really want to emphasize on. But this game was an ace, purely because I capped all the bases, but I had C from the beginning, and then I managed to get 4 kills, which adds a ton of supremacy points and gives you a ton of XP. Again, well, as said before, this was a tech tree tank, so it does not make any credits better than any other regular tech tree vehicle. Next, I'm going to show this battle on Oasis Palms. In this battle, I want to emphasize where I go on the map, because a lot of the time on Oasis Palms, heavies will go to base C. Sometimes they also go to B and A, but a lot of the times they go to base C. In this one, I'm not going to do that, because the T-150 actually excels on flat ground, despite it also having a good turret and a good 7 degrees of gun depression. The reason for that is because on flat ground you can angle the hull very easily. It's less unpredictable, as your upper plate isn't sticking up over a ridgeline and that upper plate is weak. And on flat ground, of course, you can just side scrape very well on the buildings and just bounce shots. So here, notice my mobility. Despite the other two tanks not moving much, you can see that I'm being pretty quick into position. It's only roughly 45 seconds and I'm already at base C, going partially uphill. So you can see that the mobility of this tank is not bad. It's not as fast as a KV-1S, however, for having so much more armor, it is actually pretty good. And that is also one thing to note. The T-150 has more armor than any other KV tank at tier 5, 6 and 7, other than the KV-3 and the KV-220, which is ironic because the KV-220 is tier 5. But beside the point, it's more armor than the KV-1S and the KV-2. There you can see I shot the SU because I thought it's easier for him to get away, and he's a more dangerous gun, so I'm going to try and get him out. And there you could see the side armor. I quickly pulled into cover so he wouldn't have a shot on my front, and he would just bounce off the side. It's also worth noting though, at such a long range, the chance of the SU bouncing off my front was also fairly decent. So here I'm just going to push right into the enemy base because I am confident in the armor of this tank, and also because it's free damage. So here on the KV, you'll see I low roll a little bit, only doing 250 something damage. Then I pull against this rock, so the T-37 doesn't have shots into my front, and you can see he bounces off me. There you can see the KV-1 bouncing off my front, I believe. And then the Dickermax shoots my side with tracking me in place, but not doing any damage. And then you'll see he shoots my side again. And notice my hit points. I haven't taken any damage this battle, despite having taken a few shots already. And here's a T-150 moment. On move shot, completely misses a KV-1 at point blank range. But that doesn't happen too often, I'll be honest. If you do aim just for a bit, just stop and aim a bit, then that won't happen. But yeah, in that game, almost 2,000 damage blocked, which for a tier 6, that is extremely impressive. That is 800 more hit points, well actually 700 more hit points than I have on this tank. And doing 1900 damage. Even with a 2nd class, it still doesn't make all that much credits. And note, this is with a credit booster on. And now finally the last battle, Yamato Harbour. So in this game, it does show the tank best. I do the most damage and I block a lot of damage from a few impressive enemies. But in this game, knowing the strength of this tank and knowing the enemy heavies which I face, I'm going to do something I don't usually do, which is just fully rush the top of the ship and go very aggressively to the enemies. And you'll see why it's quite significant in this tank is because generally when you rush and YOLO into an enemy position, really, you have good DPM to deal with the enemies. This tank doesn't, which is a sort of statement for how reliable its armor can be and how well it can hold up despite not having the usual DPM capabilities of a OP tank. But here I'm going to try and go forward and get a nice HE shot into the Hellcat. Luckily for me, the KV-2 is not looking at me. Not that he would have too good of a chance to penetrate. So here you can see, notice there, the Hellcat was aiming directly forward at the front of my hull. And at the last second, I turned and he bounces on my tracks. And that is something you have to do in this tank. If you notice enemies aiming right for your front, just do a turn and they'll bounce on the side. So here I'm going to focus the KV. Maybe not the best move because the KV doesn't have a great chance of dealing with me, but this Jagdpanzer IV does. Notice we are actually down by 2 tanks right now. But we managed to turn around the game quite quickly. The KV-2 goes down and then the Jagdpanzer goes down. And this KV-1 has no chance of dealing with me when my armor is angled in the way it is right now. And the KV-1 doesn't have bad penetration. 120 at tier 5 is actually very good. However, against this tank, no chance. Again, you could see against the KV I was sort of turning my hull away from him slightly to get my armor on the side over angled. And then again against the P-43 I did the same thing. I turned my hull in so the angle would be better for both the front and the side. That P-43 is going to be the best enemy I face in this video. He actually knows what he's doing. And he figures out finally, go for the front and not try and aim at this tank's sides, even when its sides are exposed. And you'll see it does it again, right through the front upper plate. So against a good enemy, they will be able to deal with this tank. You just have to play a bit more smart against them. You can't play like a madman like I did in this video, just exposing the whole hull front. Against good players, side scrape, go hull down, hide the hull front, and you'll do perfectly fine. Against bad players though, you can go full expose the whole hull front and you'll still do well, like I did in this battle. But yeah, 2,700 damage with, I think, 1,400 blocked, did it say? Yeah, almost 1,500 blocked. That was a first class. Again, not making all that much credits. This is a tech tree tank. But yeah, T-150. An unusual but overpowered tank. There is no doubt about it. It may not seem like it. If you've never played the tank before, you may be doubting how OP it is. And even those who have played the tank before might be sort of going, are you sure? I am quite sure myself. That is my opinion. I've played this tank a ton since 5.5 and it has not ever done bad, and it has always felt very OP, just because you can just troll enemies doing this and this and this and they just bounce the whole time. On top of that, you out-trade almost everything you face in tier 5 and 6. Of course, facing tier 7s, you aren't going to be as strong, but that is true for the Cryos, the Magnus, the VK36. It will hit the T-150 a little bit harder because it doesn't have the frontal armor that those 3 tanks have. However, this tank has the alpha to trade, it's got pretty good turret armor, and it can side scrape better than those other tanks. Well, the VK36 and the Magnus, that's debatable, but oh well. This tank, breaking the stereotypes for an OP tank, but it is a very good one, a very unique one, and if there is ever an opportunity to get this, I would say go for it. Currently, one of the rarest tanks in the game, so we'll see. But yeah, thanks for watching.